We have to be doubly sure that the urban legislators understand our problems and realize that the city people are dependent upon the farmer for staying in business. Farm Bureau bills, because they help the farmer, also help the city dweller and all the consumers. Never before has it been more important for us to tell our story and to tell it well.
Even back in the early 1970s, then Louisiana Farm Bureau President Jimmy Gronyard recognized the importance of lobbying to the organization he led for 26 years. And just like back then, the Louisiana Farm Bureau today prides itself in being recognized and heard here at the state capitol, as well as on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And while the names, faces, and even some of the issues have changed over the last 40 years, the reason the Farm Bureau lobbies has not. It is incumbent upon Louisiana's farmers and ranchers to impress upon lawmakers that any legislation that affects the farm community affects farmers directly at the farm gate. And that is why the Louisiana Farm Bureau must continue to be involved in the legislative process.
Vote your machines, please.
Whether at the state capitol in downtown Baton Rouge or 1,200 miles away in the nation's capital, the importance of promoting and lobbying for agriculture has never been more important. One of the main reasons behind getting involved and cultivating relationships with lawmakers is to disseminate information, to let them know how proposed bills and legislation will affect those who live and work on Louisiana's farms and ranches.
We work closely with our delegation. They know where we stand on issues. They ask us for backup information, whether it be to support or to oppose something. We feed them that information.
You know, farm lobbying is important for a number of reasons, and mainly, you know, lobbying is just give people information and then also to try to persuade them to do what you would want. And in the legislature, we have people from many varied backgrounds, a lot of people from urban areas that have no idea what the farm problems are or what goes on the farm and so forth. And so I think it's an informational source for those people that help them understand the important farm bills.
Well, of course, I rely heavily on Farm Bureau and other groups as well, but especially Farm Bureau, since I come from a rural area. They provide a lot of information. They do a very good job here in the legislature. It's been my experience. They've been very successful. You can't ever plead ignorance either when it comes to an issue involving that, you know, they have an interest in, that Farm Bureau has an interest in, because they do a good job in providing information.
Over the last few years, some of the bills that your Louisiana Farm Bureau has fought and lobbied for at the local level include the exemption of local sales tax on off-road diesel. That was a hard-fought bill where municipalities and police jurors wanted to tax this off-road fuel. The Louisiana Farm Bureau delegation vehemently opposed taxing fuel that was strictly intended for farming. The proposed tax was killed. There was also the landowner liability issue back in 2003. The Farm Bureau sponsored Senate Bill 98, which sought to limit landowners' liability when people illegally trespass on their property, even if there were no posted signs on the perimeter. Numerous other bills included critical groundwater issues, private property rights issues, and land tax usage issues. There's also been a number of battles concerning tax-exempt status for farm equipment and inputs, especially during tight fiscal budget years. On the national level, some of the issues your Louisiana Farm Bureau, along with the American Farm Bureau, have lobbied hard for include the writing of the farm bills, disaster assistance, numerous trade issues, and the one issue that didn't seem to want to die, the inheritance or death tax.
Families own 99% of our nation's farms and ranches.
The reason we are in existence as an organization is to first have a forum where all producers can come together and have a grassroots involvement in a process that develops a direction, provides for the policies that we want to implement. And then at the AFBF level, I view our primary role as implementing those policies as passed by our delegates, and that means going into Washington, working very hard on legislation, just being like a bulldog on an old cow, trying to get them moving, and that's what we do as an organization, and that is our first priority.
With more and more of our elected officials living and making a living away from the farm, it is even more critical for members of the Louisiana Farm Bureau to have their voices heard. to inform their elected officials on a grassroots level about their needs.
We depend on those sorts of meetings and that information to inform us about important legislation, whether it's the budget, including the ag budget, whether it's trade agreements. These are the folks who are directly impacted. These are the folks who own farms and produce crops and can tell you the real world impact. And when we don't, you know, the void is going to be filled by other people who may have different interests, who may be pushing a different agenda. So I really applaud the Farm Bureau for organizing farmers all across Louisiana to do this. It is very effective. It is very important.
Whether our elected officials have been in office for years, or like Representative Charles Bustani of Lafayette, who's just beginning his tenure, having a collective voice and bringing those voices to Washington is critical.
Well, I've had a number of meetings up here in Washington. I've actually met with farmers, both sugar and rice and crawfish farmers, back in the district as well since I've taken office. So we've been very busy on the agriculture front. I find the information that they provide is extremely helpful to me because I get true information as to what the impact is on different programs on their farms, and it'll make me a better legislator up here. I've got to represent their interest, and I want to do it with the right information. So I look forward to having input from them.
The Louisiana Farm Bureau has a full-time legislative affairs specialist. Joe Mapes and his team of lobbyists are responsible for shepherding specific bills through the halls of the state capitol. However, there are many times when face-to-face interaction between legislators and members of the Farm Bureau is critical in whether a bill succeeds or fails.
And when I look at lobbyist groups like Farm Bureau's activity, not only is it a part of lobbying, but it's a part of the historical knowledge that they have and good, correct, and defendable data that we can pass on to new lawmakers that won't have the experience of 10 and 15 and 20 years in the legislature.
One thing that really gives us some concern about the legislature is that we're about to get to the end or the beginning of that 12-year cycle where you cannot run. Term limits are fixing to kick into place. A lot of those key legislators that have been our friends for years are going to be gone. They'll no longer be senators, they'll no longer be representatives. They may change positions, they may run for a statewide office or whatever. But the character of the legislature is going to change dramatically in the next election cycle. And it's going to be interesting to see. And if we drop our guard, if we do not have our presence there as strong as we are right now, we could lose some things in the next 4-year election cycle.
And for Louisiana Farm Bureau members, it has never been more important to speak with one voice in order to accomplish our organization's goals, whether in committee rooms at the state capitol or in representatives' offices in Washington, D.C.
And finally, if we are to shape the values and policies that will affect not only our livelihoods, but those of our children and grandchildren, we must be seen, we must be heard, and we must be recognized as the voice of Louisiana agriculture if our industry is to thrive and survive. And that is why we lobby. Thanks for joining us, everybody.